Okay, I'm Eric Deloach. I'm your residential book author, and we have another show of American authors and others. I have a fantastic, brilliant guest of who would know would be at my church, but I mean, but of course, we're in the classic city of Athens, Georgia, so you're going to have great things here, especially at the University of Georgia. But with no further ado, let me allow this distinguished guest to introduce himself and we'll get started.
Um, my name is Dr. John H. Morrow, Jr. Um, I am the Franklin and Saye Professor of History at the University of Georgia. I've been teaching for 50 years now. I got my doctorate at the University of Pennsylvania in 1971. Because I'd grown up in the South, I chose to come back south and taught at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, from 71 to 88, and then came to the University of Georgia with an interim year at the National Air and Space Museum as a visiting professor. And I've been here for 33 years now, and I plan to make this my last teaching year. I've written a number of books. My specialty is war and society, especially the First and Second World Wars. I've done everything from aviation to African American military history to global and imperial approaches to World War I, which include not just Europe, but the African, Asian, American, and African American soldiers who fought in the war.
Wow, very good. So here the story, this show, we tried to personalize just from the start, especially when we're talking about authors, and we really honor authors because we know that you give so much information that really enriches the life of any society. Authors should, we hold them in high regard. Um, Let me start here to personalize just a little bit. Tell us where you were born, and then also tell us where you grew up, just to kind of,
All right.
Yeah, to give that
My
narrative.
early history is rather peculiar because
Okay.
I was born in South Jersey, Trenton, New Jersey. My father was a native of Hackensack, New Jersey, who had gone to Rutgers, a brilliant student, graduated Phi Beta Kappa in 1931.
Wow.
And he met my mother, who was a South Carolinian who had come north in the Great Migration, and they married. And he taught high school until 1944 when he was talking with her and he said he wanted to teach college and university. Now, as brilliant as he was and with advanced degrees, no predominantly white university would hire him. Okay. So my mother said to him, you need to go south to historically Black colleges and universities. And we did. I was born on May 27th, 1944. My parents moved to Talladega, Alabama, where there's a private liberal arts college there. Most of the schools are religiously oriented. And so I grew up on the campus of Talladega College, which is now known, Talladega is known for the raceway then, but there wasn't much of a raceway. It was a Black college in a segregated society in the Deep South. Lived there for 9 years. Then we moved to Atlanta when he taught at Atlanta University and Clark College, and then on to Durham, North Carolina. He taught at North Carolina College, which is now North Carolina Central University. And then when I was 15, he was a professor of French and spent a good bit of time in France. And so the State Department invited him to be the first ambassador to the Republic of Guinea in West Africa. And my sister, who was 7 years older than I, we persuaded him to take us with us because we wanted to go, we said, please don't leave us here, Mom and Dad. So we went with them for the year. Changed my life. Up until that point in time, I thought I would be an aeronautical engineer and a fighter pilot. And visiting a foreign country, visiting France, getting to see initially some of the battlefields where Black soldiers, Black American soldiers had fought and done incredibly well in the First World War. And then going to an African country, newly independent, and traveling in Africa. And when I came back, they were still there, but they sent me to secondary school in New England. And my focus had changed entirely. I was interested in foreign languages, foreign peoples. And when I went to college, Swarthmore College, Philadelphia, highly academic school, I was sort of fortunate enough to be a wrestler and a track athlete, a 400-meter runner, which was nice, but it focused on academics. And when I came out, it turned out I really loved history, which is something I hated in high school, but it changed. And when I came out, okay, I went on to the University of Pennsylvania and modern history, focusing on modern Europe initially, but really global. And because I'd been in Africa and these other countries, it sort of came naturally that when you become a college professor, you love teaching. If you're going to be in a major institution, you need to publish. And so when I came out, those were the two things I wanted to do. I wanted to teach and write scholarly history. And I have been fortunate enough, I found the right profession. My wife, who recently retired from the University of Georgia as professor of African history and studies, whom I met in college, by the way. I was a senior, she was a freshman. And it's been 52 years of marriage, and it's been very compatible, even if we are historians. And with two kids, our daughter's a lawyer, and our son is a decorated veteran of special forces in the Iraq War, and is now a senior social worker in the VA outside of Philadelphia. But I can't complain about my life. As I look back on it, I've been fortunate to win probably the major prize in the writing of military history, the Pritzker Prize, which not only brought with it in 2019 a beautiful medal and medallion and everything else, but $100,000 stipend, which the federal government took most of in taxes.
Okay.
It was nice to have it for a moment, but I've had a wonderful career. And in many respects, I look back and credit part of it to my parents, who really instilled in me the right values, achievement, and always doing your best. And I owe a great deal of mutual support from my wife and our kids, and even a furry cat named Mitchell, who spent 21 years with us, and whom I always told my students was grading my papers. And I think finally they believed me. But you have to keep a sense of humor, because invariably in any business that you're in, you're going to encounter difficulties. I have been fortunate. I have had good relationships with the overwhelming majority of my students, faculty, colleagues. I have not always gotten along so well with central administrations of Southern universities, because their priorities are a little different from mine. I'd like to see far more African-American students and far more African-American professors. And I found that many senior administrators are skittish about pushing the envelope there. And so my approach to life in the university has always been, somebody needs to say something. I'm always here, so speak up.
Great. What came right off to mind is that you're in that elite group of Barack Obama, and also our vice president, the first Black and woman vice president in American history, Kamala Harris. Both of those individuals were people of color that lived outside of the United States. And I'm not in that group, but what I do notice and what I kind of observe is that when that occurs, especially when they're younger, it seems to create a very scholarly person and person who is very I don't know, some a person that kind of sees above the clouds and looks down or whatever, not in a bad way, but has so many different perspectives that others may not have, and are very much high achievers and have a lot to offer. I mean, from Barack Obama to Camilla Harris, where I think her mother was a professor and also her father was a professor, but she ended up with her mother and they lived in Canada for a while, and then came back, and you see how well spoken she is. And then of course Barack Obama, I think he went somewhere in Asia uh, with his mother, who got remarried after the divorce with the husband, with his father, and I think that had a bearing to really create a great person. So there's something in the water. There's something going on with the individuals. There's something going on there that really creates a high achiever and one that has a lot to give back, to American society and the world at large. So I see that also in you, and we might be able to. We'll talk about that off screen to where we can get the paper that you gave me. Maybe we can get that. I think that should probably be in the body of this video so people can really see the tremendous things that you have done, and including also that great award that you're talking about. Just to kind of, no matter what color you are or what country you're from, because sometimes I have people in England, Canada, Germany, different people can really see, the greatness that can come also for people in America, whatever color they are. So whatever race they may be. But I'm just saying that is to be applauded. And I kind of felt when I wrote a book, okay, but when you told me you wrote several books, I said, okay, let me take the back seat. I'm junior in this case. So
I think you made very quickly, you made some very good points there about travel abroad, because I've spent a good bit of time in Africa, in England, France, in Germany. And what it does is it gives you a different perspective on the United States itself. I spent time in Africa before the TV series Roots. And
wow.
I remember specifically when I was there and we were going to take a trip up country into the mountains. And the cook for the family residence said to me and my father, when you get up there, you're going to meet your brothers.
Okay.
Because I said, well, I figured so far I was meeting all these African folks. I figured they were my brothers. So that was
Right.
He said, no, you're going to, my father looked like me,
Right.
except for frizzy hair, but
Right.
he just said it specifically. And when we got up, and the tribe that inhabited the mountains was called Fulani, the Fula tribe. And by God, when we got there, it was like, oh, geez, they really do look like us.
Okay.
Well, and it was the strangest feeling and they greeted us as long lost brothers.
Right.
And I thought, okay, I know where I come from.
Right.
I'm not worried about this anymore. When Roots came on, I thought, I knew that already, because that was, and when you travel in these other places, they have a very different perspective of the United States than we have of ourselves, especially on racial matters.
Right.
And you get there and you have to deal with it as a Black man. The first thing a lot of these people are going to say to you, your country just simply doesn't treat African Americans right. It never has. And they'll come at you and you have to deal with it. But what it does is it lets you know there's another world outside there where people think very differently about us. And it makes you view yourself and your country from a number of different perspectives. So I think your point is really well made. You said that, I thought, yeah, he's keyed in on some really important points here.
Definitely, definitely. Now, when you get to the European country, I have a friend that's went to school with me in high school that Italian, and I haven't got a chance to go over there yet, but he has invited me a few times, at least one time or two times. But what is your experience, especially as an educated, or even younger, when you before just being a regular citizen of America, but going overseas? What has your experience been in those settings compared to, let's say, the United States? I mean, like in some of the European countries, as an African American descent person in those countries.
Well, the interesting thing is that when I was doing my dissertation, my wife and I studied in Germany for a year.
Mm.
We had the fascinating situation that wherever we went, and some of these were small towns, some were university towns, we often stood out. There were African students who were studying there, but not that many African American.
Right.
But people welcomed us,
Mm.
even in the small village where we stayed. And there are bigots everywhere, but what was surprising was that they were so pleased. In fact, the village elder was a man who had fought in World War I and World War II and was a retired colonel. And when he heard I studied military history, they invited us to their big village festival. And sit at the table with him and had a great conversation. So even at that point in time, there were people who were saying, "Well, you shouldn't go back to the United States. This is the late 60s, places burning, the cities are burning." It wasn't as bad as seen from the foreign newspapers, but they said, "You should stay here. We'd be happy to have you." I said, "No, I go home. I came over here to study. I'm going back because some changes need to be made. I left the South when we're starting. I'm going back." So that was never in question. But we often found ourselves, we went down to Dubrovnik, Yugoslavia. It's a beautiful city on the Adriatic Sea, for vacation, a 2-week vacation from Vienna one summer. And we were treated as royalty, literally.
Wow.
Because what was the incident that was occurring was that the Alvin Ailey dance theater was coming to Dubrovnik to dance on the top of the castle.
Wow.
And when they looked at my wife, they thought, "Oh, she's tall and brown and she has short hair." And Judith Jamison, who was the great star at that time, they looked at Diane and they thought that she was traveling incommunicado with a secret name. So they thought she was Judith Jamison. And we spent the whole time telling, "No, we're not." But it was a wonderful experience. And then when they came, my wife's older sister's a dancer, so we got a chance to talk with them. But every time I went anywhere to do research, I never had any problems. I was fortunate enough, because I studied French and German, that when I went to these archives, occasionally an archivist might be surprised to see a brown person show up. But the minute you open your mouth and you're communicating with them in their own language, it's like, "Oh, all right, all the doors open. This fellow knows what he's here for, knows what he's doing." And so I found that I've spent a good bit of time traveling to places in World War I where African American soldiers fought and died to keep France free, and where the French loved them, although the American army didn't. So that's one of the things that I learned in writing the book on the 369th Regiment, which is the Harlem Hellfighters, a famous regiment that just got a Congressional Gold Medal, only 100 years late, because they just earned it in 1918, but it came this year. But I traveled to all these places, little villages and towns, and I even was in Italy for a while. My father-in-law was in the 92nd Infantry Division fought in Italy in World War II.
Wow.
And wherever these men went, the Europeans regarded them as liberators, their heroes. And I thought, this is absolutely refreshing.
Yes.
Because in the United States, so often our achievements were ignored, denied, not there. They appreciated the sacrifices we made. So that's one of the aspects of this that I've loved the most, actually doing the research, having sort of a personal connection to it, because I have a number of family members, ancestors, including a son who served in the military. But when you go to these places, especially from World War I and World War II, the Europeans appreciated. And even in World War II at the Battle of the Bulge, the Germans acknowledged just how brave this heavy artillery battalion, the 969th, which won a presidential citation for fighting off the Germans at the Battle of the Bulge, most people never hear about. But the German commander of the opposing troops even wrote their commander a letter later commending them for their bravery. So you actually see in real time, almost, although it's many years later, just what our ancestors, our soldiers achieved, and how welcome they were, and how appreciated and how respected they were. And that's a wonderful experience.
Wow. Wow. Do you think from receiving, and I guess I would assume that Barack Obama and Kamala Harris as well, that being overseas and getting such a, praise and respect based on who you are as a person, your character, your abilities, that you kind of felt a desire to come back to kind of get you say America on the right track, if you will, to follow suit with the rest of these countries, and just really help your fellow citizens in America, whatever color, kind of get on the right page with what that everybody's an American and everybody should be appreciated based on their merits.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the things that African Americans have often enjoyed is even a special place, say in France, when you talk about Paris Noir, Black Paris in the 20s and 30s, Josephine Baker, who was just installed in their pantheon of heroes. There are only 5 women in it. Here's an African American woman, famous singer, dancer, fought in the resistance in World War II for France. And so we actually have, in a sense, a special place. All of these areas, all these European countries have racial problems and
Right.
have racist. But American Blacks have come often to fight for the liberation of a place like France. They've been in occupation the way my uncle was for 10 years after World War II in Germany, after fighting in Italy. And what you find is that in their history, in fact, I just participated in a couple of documentaries that were French, that were celebrating African American service in World War I. Now, what happens is that you realize that this has been long known in African American history and studies. For a time, it was African American history lost, stolen, or strayed. Actually, it was basically denied. People didn't pay any attention to it. And I guess my own personal history sort of coincided with that, because when I came out of graduate school, there weren't a lot of job options there, but I was getting offers because I'd done very well. And a number of my colleagues in graduate school said, well, but where are you going to go? I said, I'm going south. And these are white fellows. They said, you must be crazy. I said, no, it's 1971. When I left in 1959, the South was just beginning to integrate. And I had been told by my high school principal in Durham that I was going to be the student chose to integrate either Duke University or the University of North Carolina. So my parents moved away. I missed that. I have an obligation to go back. I said, things are not as bad as they were, but how it's going to be is I learned the first African-American professor in the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Tennessee. I have a number of other firsts, but my objective when I went back was, all right, you'll be teaching predominantly white students in a predominantly white institution, and you're going to be a role model.
Right.
But the type of role model you're going to be is someone who comes in and shakes things up.
Okay.
And lets people know candidly, pulling no punches, what the past has been like, what the history is, and not what's been hidden, so that everybody learns. And I have found that Black and white students, I've won a number of teaching awards, have really appreciated that approach because I'm very candid with them and I pull no punches. It has occasionally gotten me in trouble with certain administrations that don't like that, but that's my First Amendment right to say what I think, and it's based on my knowledge. It's also based on my experience. So I have never regretted coming back south. I had the potential to return northeast. I turned it down. I've been happy to come back. I consider the South my home, and my attitude is I belong here. I should be teaching these folks. And what I've been pleased to do is also be certain when I've been in positions of power as a dean or as a department head. I've been a department head twice here in Georgia and once in Tennessee, always to try to get my departments to hire minorities and women. And I've been very successful at that because my attitude is I don't want to be the only one. I'm not interested in being the only one, even the head one. That doesn't make any difference. The more, the better, because you're reaching more people, and they get a chance to understand. These folks are just as smart as anybody else. They're just as brilliant, and these younger people need to know that. That's our goal, to sort of create a younger generation by essentially touching the classroom. You can realize things are different. This is not your parents, literally your parents and grandparents' South.
That's great work that you've been doing. That is great. Seriously. Let me ask you this: what got you in? When did you get the writer's bug? When did you decide? Okay, well, I guess maybe a PhD program, but when did you decide? Okay, I need to write books to really kind of set up another platform for eternity, actually, for eternity, so that people can understand some things that they may not be aware of. You could educate people through books.
No, that's a great question, because if you had met me through my high school years and early college years, writing was something you can't take for granted. You have to work at writing and style. And I was in the college honors program at Swarthmore. You did well your first couple of years, and you ended in seminars, and you had to write maybe 2 10-page double-spaced papers every week for your 2 seminars.
Okay.
At that point, when you start having to do that, you realize, all right, I've got to work on my style. It's not just what I've got to say, but how do I say it? How well do I express it? How directly? How comprehensible is it to my audience? And so by the time I got to graduate school, I was very much accustomed to, first of all, doing the research in documents in English as well as in foreign languages, but as well understanding increasingly what I wanted to write about, which was the World War I era. And in part it was because as a modern European and German specialist, everybody in those years wrote, this is the 60s, late 60s, on World War II. And when my advisor asked me what did I want to write I said everybody writes on World War II. I'm a lot more interested in World War I. Now, what I didn't think about when I said that was probably one of the things that was driving me was I knew about my great uncle, who was awarded a Distinguished Service Cross in the French Croix de Guerre for valor in World War I in the American Expeditionary Force. And then my father's experiences overseas, my uncle being in occupation in Germany for 10 years. And that all undoubtedly played into it, but it wasn't a conscious thing. I was just sort of drawn to it. And once I started writing, I began in military aviation, as I said, and I wrote 3 books on World War I military aviation. Very celebrated. One is still the standard work. And I enjoyed that, but one of the things that I noticed as I wrote was that, gee, isn't this interesting? Black people keep appearing in funny places that you don't. You know, I was there's a fellow by the name of Eugene Bullard, who came from Columbus, Georgia, who fled and ended up fighting in World War I in the French Foreign Legion at major battles, was wounded, and then actually was the first Black pilot to take to the air as a fighter pilot in the French Air Service in World War I.
Wow.
And when the United States entered, since we didn't want any Black pilots, we forced the French to get him out of the air. So he ended up back in the army, but he stayed in France, married, daughters. And in 1939, 40, when the Second World War started, he joined the French army again and fought in 1940, then escaped to the United States. But later on, Charles de Gaulle, when de Gaulle was president, actually made Bullard a Knight of the French Legion of Honor, and you cannot receive a higher award. He was brought back to France to light the eternal flame under the Arc de Triomphe with 2 other men who had fought for France in World War II and I. And it was just amazing. But he was a man who was known to others around him as an elevator man in a New York high-rise. And, you know, they call them elevator boys. And I'm thinking, this is no boy. This is a man. He's fought in 2 world wars, been decorated and so on. But it was sort of encountering people. And I had another photo of a Black Frenchman who was actually an aircraft mechanic on French aircraft in Russia in World War I. I'm thinking, hey, we appear everywhere in unexpected places. And so what I gradually did, I left aviation to do what I call the imperial and global approach, because that way I was able to integrate all the countries. World War I was a global war. The French, the Germans, the British, everyone who fought relied on their imperial soldiers to fight this war. So you've got Africans, Asians, Indians, Indo-Chinese, you name it. And of course, the United States African Americans. And to pull that all together, I had to take an entirely different perspective on the war, because usually people focused on Europe. I said, no, this is a global war. And I think the interesting thing about the book was that it was the first book that came out in 2004 to take this approach.
Wow.
And that's probably the key book that got me in the end the Pritzker in 2019, because it had a great impact, and it was reissued 10 years later in a new edition. But once I got hooked on the writing, what it meant was that I would simply, the exciting part was going to Europe or going to American archives and doing research. And that's very solitary. You have to pour all these dirty documents, some of which haven't been seen since World War I. And then you think, okay, I found some really good material. Then you come home and you write. You sit down, and as an author, you sit down and you write, you revise. When our kids were young, I got assistance that I probably didn't need from my 2 children when they were like 2 and 5. because they wanted to help me at the typewriter at that time. So we have a couple of infamous family pictures where one shows our daughter allegedly typing with her feet, with her heels. I'm holding, and the second one shows me out cold and she's taking the typewriter. But the main thing was work and get it right. And then my wife, we are both proofreaders for one another and editors. And so it's meant the nice thing is you get to interact with students. So
Right.
you're interaction and acting and teaching folks.
Right.
But you're doing that on the basis of work that you've done, that you've written, that's published, and that makes you an authority in the field. So to this day, I consult a lot with museums. I consult with the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and their exhibit, major exhibit, We Return Fighting on African Americans in World War I. I consulted with the National World War II Museum in New Orleans on their African American exhibit, Fighting for the Right to Fight. But it's, in a sense, put me in demand to work with other institutions that reach the public. And that's really enjoyable when you're working in a museum setting and helping folks, consulting with them. How do you create an exhibit? I helped the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum develop their original revised exhibit in 1988-89 on World War I airpower. So that's another side of it. I've been invited to teach at West Point. All these different experiences. I have enjoyed every last one of them.
This is my first time on either of my shows. I'm going to buy that book. And I mean, you're not giving it to me. I'm just saying, I'm going to buy that book, and I want to buy maybe a few copies for.
I have two books here.
Right.
One is Harlem's Rattlers in the Great War. The other is the Great War in Imperial History. I'm going to leave copies if we're not in church at the same time. You don't have to buy them.
No. I believe in support.
That is kind, Eric. But I'm so old, I don't need support anymore.
No. It's not. I mean, I'm sure. Not that. I just put it on the record as purchase. It's not. It's you. We know that that you're doing well, and that you're still doing well. So it's not that. It's just to put on the record it's sold. It's not.
That is very kind of you. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, just from no, it's not. No, it's not that. Not from the business economic standpoint. But from the just support, because I mean just
okay.
On the records, because it's great.
Just say this: you honor me in your willingness to do that. You will also have to understand that I will have to autograph those books for you. All right.
Okay.
That's a stipulation. Don't you dare buy them and not bring them to church.
Well, I think it's gonna be a Christmas present for my mother.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Your mother's a marvelous member of the church, has always been. So I would look forward to that.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting too. Maybe my sister with her children, they should. I know for my mother, I would buy the book, but I'm saying that I think definitely. This interview we'll make sure that it's on the website for our church, so that I'm just learning a wealth of information, and it was so interesting. You were talking about it. What initially said to you, okay, well, I know that other books will be written a certain way. What caused you to say, okay, I'm going to write it my way, and I want to go here? What caused that?
Once again, excellent question.
Mm-hmm.
People have written numerous books on World War I. I'm working on a book on World War II.
Okay.
The book I wrote, Harlem's Rattlers, with my good friend and colleague Jeffrey Sammons at New York University, is considered the definitive history of the Harlem Hellfighters. It was 10 years of work on the part of both of us. He wrote the pre-war and the post-war, and I wrote the wartime experience and spent time in France visiting the battlefields of the archives. We each bring something unique to what we write. Sometimes people will say, well, someone's already written about that. Why are you doing it? Well, occasionally it's because I happen to know where there are new archival sources that no one has been able to research before. One of the interesting aspects of doing the Harlem Hellfighters books called Harlem's Rattlers in the Great War was that my colleague, Jeff Sammons, is an American specialist. So he knew where the American documents were. I was teaching at West Point when we initiated this, and the colonel, who was the chair of the department at West Point, and I are close friends, he said, you know something, we've got a collection in there from a fellow who was a white officer in the 369th, John Castles, and he left us all of his written materials. Nobody knew about it. I pulled up Castle's documents, and they were wonderful. He initially didn't want to be part of this regiment. Once they got to France, and they trained with the French, and when they fought, he realized, as he put it in one letter to his mother, my men fought like tigers.
Wow.
So even with the most of the white officers that were in the regiment were incredibly supportive and praiseworthy. It came out of New York, which meant they didn't have to deal with Southern officers who would not have fit that bill. But once I got a hold of that, and then the colonel said, well, listen, you're headed for France, so I'll write you a letter of introduction. I'd already worked in the French aviation archives, but he wrote me a letter of introduction to a good friend of his who was the colonel who ran the Army archives. So I show up with a letter of introduction from another colonel, and we have this great conversation. And then he says to me, we'll open up the archives for you. I'll give you all the relevant sources. You search them out, and they're all yours. So, open door.
Wow.
After the book came out, another historian wrote us and said, I don't understand how Morrow got all those documents. He said, I had written to the French archive, the French military archive. They said they just stiffed me. He said,
okay,
we don't have anything here for you.
Right.
And I didn't have it. I wasn't going to do this.
Right.
But I'm thinking to myself,
Mhm.
Often in foreign archives, it's who you know.
Right. Yes.
Also, can you speak the language?
Right.
And those open doors. And I thought, yeah, one colonel talking to another. This African-American guy shows up, and then he says, oh, you know, I worked over there in the other corner in the aviation archives, and I know Patrick Facon who runs that archive. And they think, oh, okay, you're part of the group. And they open it up. I've had that happen in Germany, where I've come in, and initially someone's been reluctant to open document collections to me. And then I'll tell them, you know, are you aware there's some documents in another German archive that you may not know about that are relevant to your subject? And they find out and they think, oh, geez, he really knows his way around. So then I get to see the archives. But I think it's one of these things that you have to be persistent. You have to kind of understand the culture in which you work. In American archives, if you show up, they're supposed to open them up in the National Archives. It doesn't work that way. In France and in Germany, you make a bad impression, and I've seen guys make bad impressions. They will usher you out the door very politely,
Right.
and just say, I don't have anything for you. And I'll be sitting there merrily thinking, well, you know, sometimes it doesn't hurt to be African American and knowing the game. But yeah, it works that way. And it's once you get into that mode, you're always writing. I'm either writing articles, or I'm writing, sometimes I'm helping edit collections from museums and helping to write them. But it's a constant effort. And it means that, I'll take a few months off. Some people never do. I take a few months off because I don't ever want to write the same thing again. That's why I've changed topics so many times. But it's because I've been interested in increasing the trajectory. Was German aviation demonstrated, and then European aviation, that as a Black man in history, I could be an authority on any subject.
Okay.
I was not limited to African American history. And having demonstrated that and established my reputation there, then I thought, okay, now it's time to do the global and imperial and racial aspects of war, which is what really interested me. And then I came to American history to do the Harlem Hellfighters, in part because I felt I owed it to my ancestors who had fought in the world wars, and to my son who was fighting in Iraq at the time. I dedicated it to them and to my wife's father. My father-in-law was a regimental surgeon, decorated regimental surgeon in the 92nd Division in Italy in World War II. And I said, I owe this to them. So there's always been this connection. In World War II, what's driving the book is going to be a very different approach that other people have taken. It's in part, undoubtedly, because of my race and my racial perspective, but not every Black man looks at things the same way. It's also part of my experience. I met Senegalese infantry when I was in Guinea. They were all called Senegalese at the time. And these men had fought most recently in Indochina. So they're still fighting for the French. And all that goes into making up what I think about when I'm writing a book about World War II. And many other historians simply are not thinking that way.
Wow. Now, how many, that's really great. How many books, I know you're working on one or maybe two, who knows, but, and some are probably in the, that some more, but I mean, especially once you retire, you can do even more, dedicate more time. How many books to this date have you published or written or whatever?
Well, I pace myself. Some people write a lot more frequently than I do. Some people don't. I've written
Right.
7 books and co-authored one.
Okay.
And it's at a pace that I set for myself, because with each book, it required new research, additional research, or getting myself up to speed. When I was doing the global history, and I'm still working in World War II, I had to get up to speed in Asian history. I was very conversant in African history and European history and American history, but to do a very good job on all these, it's like getting Indian history, Chinese history, Japanese history, Indo-Chinese history. It's got getting a handle on those from their perspectives. It's not just from American perspective, but what did they think about what they were doing and how did they approach it? And so it takes a good bit of time, and I've never been in a rush to publish, because I'm pretty well determined to try to get it right, what I think is right, at least. And so far, I've been lucky with the World War I book. When I first proposed it, it was to a British press because they love World War I. The 2 British readers, one said, let's see if he can do it, in part because I was American. Right. The American reader said, yeah, Morrow's obviously capable of doing this. But one of the British readers said, he can't do this. No one can do it because no one has mastered all the material. And when I sent the manuscript to them. And for the longest, people write essays on what they think of the manuscript. Normally like 2 pages. This guy wrote 6 pages.
Wow.
And in the end, he said, I can't find any holes in it. I can't find any holes in the documents, in the arguments. He said, but I still would not use this as my introductory book to World War I because it's too far ahead of the curve.
Okay.
What he was saying, euphemistically, was there are too many people of color in this damn thing, and I can't.
Okay. Okay.
So the funny thing was, it's been used in classrooms, but when I first went to England to the Imperial War Museum, which is the great war museum, beautiful museum, and I walked into the bookstore, and I see in the middle of the bookstore, okay, this English fellow had doubts, 4 stacks of copies of my book in the middle of the floor of the bookstore on major display.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, and I walked in, and I just happened to be talking to the woman at the bookstore, and I said, how's that book doing? She said, it's selling like hotcakes.
Wow.
It's popular. And I said, yeah, that's really nice to hear. I said, I'm the author. And she looked at me and she said, are you kidding me? I said, no, ma'am, I am the author. She called out the bookstore, and then they called out the museum director.
Wow.
I said, here, I said, I love the museum. I've been here a number of times, but I was thinking, maybe he didn't think it was going to make it because it was too far ahead of the curve, but it was what a lot of people were looking for. And I was actually invited over to do a couple of British book shows.
Right.
So, yeah, you sort of have to be confident. And
right.
I have been confident that you're getting it right and you're doing the best you can. And then you have to be able to, and my wife helps me do this, make arguments. Sometimes it gets very sophisticated and you get too involved in it and you have to pull back and you say, no, you got to express this to an audience who doesn't know what you know, but you pull them in that way. So, that's one of the keys to writing, but it takes 4 or 5 drafts to get it right. And then other times, boy, you nail it and you think, yeah, I did learn to write once upon a time. Maybe I can keep doing it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think too, when you're talking about the British audience, that group market, that they're big readers. So I think that they probably want something unique. I don't care how advanced it is or whatever the case. They want something that's from a different perspective, that's creative, and that's what's going to sell. If you're the next same thing, I read that before,
Exactly.
but if you come from a different perspective and a different angle and different approach, then that's going to be celebrated and appreciated.
That's always the take I've had on it. And I use the book in class with my students, and they'll say after they've read it, we had no idea of any of this.
Right.
I said, that's what going to college and taking college classes means. That, when I do World War II, I use different sources. I really haven't read that much in high school, even about World War II, but when they come out, they just say, I never realized it was this big in Russia or in China and so on. So, that's the object of an educator. And I write essentially as an educator. I'm not a popular historian, but my books have been well written enough to sell to the public, but I've never billed myself as a popular historian simply because I'm an academic. And I write for mainly a student audience, but a student through graduate student, including professors, but it's a book that, say, the general public can read once they get to be a certain age that they can have.
What do you think? Let me go here. Not overtake time here, but what do you think about Autobooks in terms of, let's say, for the older crowd that said it may be I'll share this with you. Okay. That doing some research and I found like a documentary that was about the Olympics. And I'm not gonna, I'll tell you off the set how much it made. You'll be blown away. But I was blown away that but they were very successful and
Mhm.
and old folks and sitting living in old folks homes, that was their market, and they sold. I'll say this, but I won't I'll tell the other part off screen. But to kind of just see where it was going, one event that was a convention, and one day they made $70,000 in one day.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so,
Okay.
but it's even more than that. I'm not gonna. This is some serious. I don't. Yeah. But between you, we can share. I'm sure. But the point is that when I bring up Autobooks, is that you may have older people that have dementia, different elements, or whatever the case may be, but they're intellectual still.
Mhm.
And they may be open to at least hearing the book. You know, like somebody reads it, you know, with the audio book, they can hear some. And also for the kids, to kind of get them in the right direction. Let's say the church or
Mhm.
other organizations where we kind of congregate, whites or blacks, whatever the case may be. If the
Mhm.
kids get to this, they're not really ready to read it, be heavy readers, but if they can just hear it read to them in an audio book, that kind of prepares them to be great readers, prepare them to potentially be, you know, future authors and scholars. So what is your thought, your take and thoughts on audio books, especially with you having this revolutionary approach and to your writing and to your presentation of your book? What do you think?
Um, Eric, I had never thought about that until you just raised it. But
Yeah.
you make excellent points. Um, okay, I never thought about audiobooks, but I've got friends who tell me, academics who tell me that's how they drive on the highway. They put an
Right.
audiobook, they're listening to it while they drive up the highway. It's a good way to get the book and absorb it. And 9 times out of 10, it's not that I'm opposed to audiobooks. In fact, it's something that I really never conceived of. Um, I think one of them might actually be an audiobook, because it's so popular. I've never made anywhere close to the kind of money because an academic, I'm not worried about it. That's I get my salary paid. If I get a few thousand, 10,000 plus, that's really neat. But the thing is that uh, your point is absolutely critical because that's a way to reach people that you wouldn't. One of the things I've liked about doing museum work is it's a visual, and your work is put in a visual mode. And then if they want to buy the exhibit book that goes with it, then they get to read your essay. And so it's a different way of transmitting the knowledge to people. But that is an excellent idea. Um, One of the reasons that I've been so focused on writing and the books is that I find so many students in this generation in particular, they're used to visuals, screens, and so on, and they don't read. And they've gotten used to basically, can I get this in a short version? No, you cannot. You read this book. And I remember when I first went to the University of Tennessee, students said, "This sure do require a lot of books, a lot more than other faculty do." I said, "Yes." And then as the semester wore on, they said, "Well, other faculty may assign a book." They said, "But they don't ever talk about it." Um, when you assign a book, we talk about it in class. We go over, you ask, you may even have it on a test and so on. And at the end, they would come out and they'd say, "We talked to our students who are in these other classes, and they don't know anything about the materials that we've learned. And I said, all right, now you're getting the point. I didn't have to tell you, you've realized. I said, having come from the Northeastern schools, when I went north, I realized how deficient my education was in the South, because African Americans were at the bottom of the totem pole academically. We get handoff books from white schools and so on. I said, but what I learned in the Northeast was that white students were deprived too, because they're thinking, oh, I'm getting a better education than those black kids. They have no idea. They're not getting a good education compared to people in other areas of the country, like the Northeast and the West Coast. These people are reading more, they're doing more work, more sophisticated work. And I said point blank to them, and I told folks at Georgia when I came, that when you come out of my course, you will have gotten a comparable course to the best that any university can give, and you will be competitive. And some students I've sent undergraduate school have found that to be exactly the case. And the things I've taught them, the professors are surprised that, wait a minute, how do you know more than these Ivy League students? And the students write me and they say, because Dr. Morrow, or the evil Dr. Morrow. But the point is, my attitude is, you're going to know it. And that's why I focus so much on the books and the reading of the books. But you bring in an entirely different angle that I think is absolutely important. And I think it's very relevant. I shall have to think about that, Eric.
Yeah, and then you have some people that are not big readers. And one, if 2 or 3, 4 books, they'll may kind of get it, hey, maybe I need to read, maybe I need to jump out on a ledge and just read, because all this great information that I'm hearing read to me, I wouldn't know if I'm going to the party, I'm doing something else that is okay in its right place, but you still need to learn. Learning is essential.
And practice makes perfect, I always say.
That's right. Now, what do you think about potentially your books or other authors in terms of making the leap over into film, like Harry Potter, but that's another. But I mean, just what do you think about that?
That's an interesting point, because when we wrote, Jeff and I wrote the 369th book, we thought, whoa, we've got a great subject here, definitive work historically. And then what happened was that this fellow Max Brooks, who is the son of comedian Mel Brooks.
Okay.
Max Brooks wrote this, what do you call it? It's a comic book. It's a large comic book on the 369, which was totally inaccurate,
right?
But it had pictures and so on and so forth. And the first thing was that Will Smith, and I forget which studio, bought the option to the book. And Jeff and I are sitting there thinking, oh, you bought the option to a comic book that isn't even historically accurate. And here our book is. Okay, it's fine, it's longer, but it's accurate. And so we had it wasn't embarrassing. We were invited up to the Library of Congress to talk about our book.
Right.
And we had, and then the moderator, actually it wasn't a moderator, it was a person in the audience stood up there fielding questions. They said, are you aware of Max Brooks's History of the Harlem Hellfighters, comic book form, whatever they call it? And he said that it's been optioned. And he asked us, what do you think of that? Well, my colleague Jeffrey teaching at New York University was very delicate and very diplomatic. He said, well, I guess people can appreciate that. And so he said, but, maybe, and then I realized what he was fishing for. Maybe we could be asked to be consultants on the movie if they ever make it. And I thought, Jeffrey's looking to the far horizon. Maybe they'll pull us in to be consultants. I don't look to the far horizon. And they said, Doug, what do you think? Professor Morrow. I said, let me put it bluntly. I'm annoyed as hell.
Okay.
They a comic book
Right.
on African Americans.
Right.
To try to reproduce as a movie.
Right.
There are books out there, scholarly books that
Right.
have all the material. It's correct.
Right.
You don't have to make up anything to show how excellent a bunch of soldiers these men were. It's the truth. The
Right.
comic book doesn't even get at it. I said, I'm thoroughly annoyed, and I don't
Right.
want anything to do with the movie when they make it. I've got
Wow.
other things. But I think this is something that, in fact, my cousin has been a screenwriter and script writer and TV for a number of years now. He's basically pretty much retired, but I had never thought about it. I've actually been a consultant on TV documentaries. I'm a consultant on a series coming out on Apple TV in the near future on Masters of the Air, which is about B-17 pilots in World War II, but these men end up in prison camps with the Tuskegee Airmen. And so they wanted some of us who knew a good bit about the Tuskegee Airmen to talk to their actors about what they needed to know. But that's as far as I've gotten. It's something that I think you can aspire to if you write a certain way, but 9 times out of 10, when they pick something for movies or TV, they're looking for something that is a bit more popular.
Okay.
Large number of anecdotes, less what I would call scholarly assessment about what's really going on. But they're far more interested in the anecdotal aspects. I have the anecdotal aspects in my books, but I'm much more interested in putting those anecdotal aspects into a context that people can understand so they can get new insights into the material we're talking about.
What I'm thinking, I look at Black Panthers and I look at Harry Potter, which are very well, with Harry Potter came from a book, but I mean, very detailed, very, and I think that for film is the Black Panther that was huge, that it's not your normal film. Harry Potter, it's very creative, and I think that those would make for better films than for some formula that has been done 1,000 times. So, and I mean, that I guess that's what happened with the Black Panther, that it was totally unique.
Absolutely.
Totally different. Yeah, and Harry Potter, the same thing, was totally Star Wars, totally something that was just out of imagination. And yeah, I think that your book could instead of dumbing down or bringing or whatever, if it can really use the I think we can learn a lot, and it could be something that's very significant.
I agree with you. You've been raising books that are fiction, and I think often fiction lends itself. One of the more interesting aspects of doing sort of historical fiction, and some people do it very well. There's some series that are historical fiction that are really engaging and excellent. Military history as well. And what's been interesting is that I've never written anything in format that
Right.
would be adaptable. And in a sense, it's because in thinking along scholarly terms as opposed to more popular terms, I've rooted myself, directed myself in a certain career path. And that's one of the things every so often I think, well, you know, you could do something like that. And then I go off on another tangent and think, what else is there out there that I think I need to probe in the way I do? And so it's like choices. I have some colleagues who do absolutely brilliant military history. It's popular, it's excellent, and they've turned those books into series, HBO series, and they're wonderful series. I love watching them, but I've never been tempted to write that.
Right.
It's just my orientation.
It may come to in the future that it has to be your unique author that has a certain way of doing, revolutionary, unique way of doing things, and you would have to have the right screenwriter and director that that are talented enough to collaborate with you and make sure that it's a pure presentation of what needs to be seen, shown to the audience.
Well, I think the best, as I said, the book I was thinking about, which was a book on the Harlem Hellfighters,
Right.
with a good screenwriter,
Right.
and someone willing to read what we had written. There were plenty of anecdotes, and they're all true, all accurate, that would make for a much better movie or series than anything that came out of a comic book.
Right.
That's what is, but you have to have someone who have the intelligence to say, let me look at this and realize, oh God, they've got all kinds of stories. These guys' achievements, combat, behind the lines, and so on, how they were drawn up in New York City at the time. So it's all there, but it would take, in many respects, Hollywood. One of the things that Hollywood does that I do not necessarily appreciate is that it tends to play fast and loose with the history. It takes liberty with the history, and as I met a fellow whose book was done. He was at that time a lieutenant colonel, who written a book on Vietnam, and he was obviously Mel Gibson played him, and there were some problems because of what his wife thought the way they were portraying things. Fort Benning at the time, inaccurate. She was there, and then he had some problems. And when they talked to the director, he said, "This is not the History Channel. This is Hollywood." And
Okay. Okay.
Encapsulates my attitude right now. I've done a lot of documentaries for the History Channel. That's
right.
my niche.
Okay.
Hollywood. I think that's a reach beyond me. It's just because it's sort of personal preference.
Right. Right. I'll just ask a few more questions. Maybe another time we come back. But what do you what is your recommendation to of any race, black, white, or whoever, young people that that want to inspire, or you feel like have the talent to write and have something to say? What do you say to that group? What of any race?
Okay, yeah, that's a fair question. I think, I read my students' papers. I don't know how many thousands I've read now, and some of them I've taken them aside, and I think, oh, this is actually really well done, very thoughtful. It's a different level from what your peers have written, and you don't have to be a writer, you don't have to be a historian, but you take them aside and say, you have the potential, you have the gifts, if you're willing to work hard to develop them, to be a very fine writer, depending upon what you like to write on. And so on. The topics have to be yours. It doesn't do any good for, I know when I was going through graduate school, and people would say, well, some of them would go and just go to their advisor and ask for a recommendation. They would do that. My advisor had recommendations. I said, this is what I want to do. This is what I feel I should do. And that's my suggestion. In other words, what every individual who wants to write brings is that his or her unique personality and unique perspectives. And if you feel you have something to say, you want to hone your writing style, and that takes time and practice to the point where you can say it well. And then you have to have the grit, the courage. You can't be faint of heart. You have to be prepared for rejection. You have to be prepared for recommendations to advise or to cut. And you're sitting there thinking, oh, God, that's my blood on that page. 25 pages. Smacking yourself. No, you don't do that. You just say, okay, it's cool. I get it. I know how to do this. I can make this adjustment and so on. So you can't get so closely tied to it, even if you spent a very long time doing it. You just have to stay with it. So that's my recommendation. Nothing substitutes for hard work, but imagination and having the courage to put yourself out there with your own beliefs or ideas. That's the key. And sometimes they hit, sometimes they don't. The times often determine what is popular. But if you're writing for yourself and you're in the context of these times, one of the things I was praised for when I was awarded the Pritzker was that I had the ability to make history relevant to today's students. And I think that's very important because, as the old statement goes, history is not the past. It's not even past. It lives on. You can see with the issues that are arising in America today that in many respects, we haven't come very far in terms of race and gender. And then in other respects, we've come very far. And the two are clashing right now because some people wish we hadn't come this far and would like to go backwards and undo the progress. And there are a good number of people, fortunately so far more, that understand, we don't need to go back there. Some of us actually remember what it was like, having lived through it. We know damn well we don't need to go backwards. There's only a way to get at others is forwards, because history, one of the things history tells you, you can't go back. Every time somebody has tried to go back, like Hitler resurrecting another empire, it always screws up big time and people get hurt. And for these characters nowadays who think, oh, another civil war, yeah, you tear this country apart, no one will survive decently. But history teaches you a lot of lessons if you're willing to listen to them. And if you're ignorant and you don't want to hear them, and you got some crazy idea off of the internet or something like that, it's conspiracy, it's going to work. It won't work, but it's going to mess up a lot of people, and not just the people you think you want to mess up. It's going to mess you up too. So, history is very insightful in those respects.
Great. And what do you want for the future of the writing industry, the writing ecosystem? What do you what do you want to see for the writing industry?
A couple of things, and I'm going to have to run in a couple of minutes because.
Sure. I just have one more question after this, but go ahead. Well, two quick questions, yeah.
First of all, I like it a great deal that now there are so many more Black authors being published.
Right.
And there are presses like Amistad, branches of major presses that actually do Black publications.
Right.
All my publications have been done by scholarly presses, but
right.
I had folks recommend other presses to me, and I may turn to them at some point in time. But I think the thing is that I like that a great deal, and that for African American kids and anyone else who wants to read about African American history or stories, tales, and so on, the material out there is so much greater than it was when I was coming along as a youth in the late 40s and 50s. It is not funny, it's amazing. And I can remember that I would see things, or I would look at history books, and I would go to my parents and say, this doesn't make any sense. Why somebody say Black people like slavery? My father would say, my father and I curse a lot, so I won't say what he said, but he said, that's crap.
Right.
Or that, I'll tell you what your grandparents thought. And
right.
So that was a saving grace, having parents who were educated, which ensured that I had a basis for going further. But I really love that about the ecosystem now. And everywhere I turn, as I said, I think with the museums doing what they're doing, and since I function in that set of institutions, I really like that. That's one way I can think, okay, my knowledge, my work is getting on the page, but it's also on that exhibit that you just went through, that you can look and see and watch the visuals. I love that. And when I participate in something like that and you go through it afterwards, you think, I had a role in that. I'm pretty proud of that.
That's great. And here we go, just two quick questions, two quick things, and that's it. For this time around, I guess. Definitely want to bring you back around. Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. So how has COVID, the period of COVID, as an educator, as a historian, as a distinguished writer, and as an American citizen, how has what was that experience the last 2 years been in terms of your professional life, your personal life, all of etc.?
Well, COVID has made me, I guess, hope that one day we may go back to normal, but I somehow doubt it. Number one, when it first started circulating, and at mine and my wife's age, I thought, well, this is going to be interesting. What will UGA do? Well, the first year, they insisted on everyone being masked and spaced in class, and that was mandated. It made really good sense. And I taught all my classes. People said, don't you want to teach on Zoom? I said, I like to be in the same classroom with my students, and I will not be on Zoom. I've done documentaries on Zoom. I have done interviews. I've done symposia. This kind of thing. This is great. But if I'm going to be teaching a class, I want to be in that classroom with those students, watching how they react, watching the body language, and making certain everybody's involved. Well, this second year, the governor, who spent his time fighting mandates, and the regents who spent their time fighting mandates, and the university administration, which is basically, I think, too afraid to get out in front and say, we have to protect this university community, and they're So they wouldn't mandate any masks or anything else. So they did even less than they did the first year. And that struck me as just stupid.
Okay.
Some stuff
Okay.
is just dumb, and you're watching people be dumb and be adamant about it and get all bad about it. And one of the problems at the university was we had a certain set of students. I learned this after the first day, but it was too late for me anyway. But that students were coming, a few students were coming into class and crossing their arms and sitting there. And when faculty would ask them to mask with good reason, they would say, "I don't have to mask." And the faculty would have to put up with that because there was no mandate. Well, it just so happened I walked into my classes the first day. And in one of the classes, one student comes in, and I was meeting him at the door. The fellow was somewhat late. Everybody's wearing a mask. Everybody in all three classes. This one guy comes in, and I'm offering him a mask. He said, "I don't have to mask." I said, "Well, listen, everybody else is masked. My wife has cancer. Her immune system is compromised. I would just appreciate it. I don't like wearing a mask either if you wear a mask." He said, "I don't have to." Well, what went through my mind was, no, you don't have to, but you also don't have to take this class. I said, "Get the hell out of here."
Okay.
And he ran.
Wow.
I turned to the rest of the class. I said, "I hope nobody has a problem with that." He said, No, we don't. I go back to the history department and the academic advisor, "How are your classes today?" I said, "Oh, they were great. They were great. Except I had to throw a kid out because he wasn't masked." And she says, "You can't do that. There's no mandate here." I said, "I already did it and he won't be back." And one of my colleagues goes and says, "You're my hero." When the department found out about it, they started kidding me. They said, "What is this, going full Morrow on people?" I said, "I'm old. In my classroom is my classroom.
Right.
I'm not going to sit in there and have some wet behind the ears character tell me what he is not going to do. That's not my style." So yeah, I've had no problems, but at the same time, I realized in 50 years of teaching, that was one of the things that made me think, you got a lot of things you can do. If a university is not wise enough to protect the community, but it's just going to say, "Oh, please, would you mask and so on." I don't buy that stuff. If somebody needs to do something and they don't want to do it, and it's for the good of everyone, you don't take no. You say you can leave, go somewhere else. It doesn't have to be that way. So it takes, I think, courage. So many people, because of the way the previous president was, it's like they defy common sense. They just do stupid things to be doing stupid things because this is cool. I'm going to defy. I'm going to show you I don't have to do this. I'm thinking, yeah, you can go ahead and defy, and you can also die from COVID. But stay the hell away from me.
Right.
You're not having to die from it. So I think that, it's taught me a lot, interestingly enough, about things that have happened in the past where people haven't responded very logically or even very responsibly to mass movements and so on. And you realize that as a human race, we really haven't made any progress at all because we're still doing the same stupid damn things we did a century before. And you think, haven't you learned anything? Well, you might have learned something from history if you knew it, but you don't. So here we go again.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess that they don't quite understand. They just don't quite. You have an understanding. They don't have. And the last thing, leads in. Tell us about which books you want us to know about in your current book that's out, and then tell us where we can actually, if there's fans or people, how can they? We'll put it in the body of the video as well. But how can people reach out, find your books, and maybe communicate with you if there's if
Okay.
that's possible.
There are two books I've written that probably, I won't recommend the museum works. They're relatively big books, but not that big.
Right.
One is entitled, and I don't know if this comes across at all with light, The Great War and Imperial History. Looks like it's backward. Yeah, The Great War and Imperial History.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about the cover that we immediately noticed was there were black soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
And they were thinking, what war is this? The Great War? Because I didn't tell them. And I did that deliberately. It's World War I. And those are African soldiers, Senegalese soldiers in training for the Western Front in France. And the other one is Harlem's Rattlers and the Great War. And Harlem's Rattlers and the Great War is about the 369, the famous regiment, the African-American regiment of World War I. I've done a number of other things, but these books are currently available on Amazon, and you get them very easily. And probably while you're there, actually, if you, I've done a number of other books. Some of them are available, some of them are not. So sometimes they appear on Amazon, sometimes they don't. But for the audience I'm thinking about, for aviation buffs, they look for something else and they know me for that. But those are things I wrote a number of years ago. But these are the books that I'm proudest of, and the ones that I think people would get the most out of. And I've never used Harlem's Rattlers in the Great War because it's a pretty lengthy book, but I've used the Great War and Imperial History in my courses, and my students have all appreciated it. So I think they're a good test.
Definitely. And what can, and where can they, Amazon is where they can get the books. Where can, if they want to reach out to you, maybe ask a question or just learn something, how, is there any way that they can
Sure.
reach out?
My email address is jmorrow, JMORROW @uga.edu.
Okay.
I don't mind making that available. A number of years ago, when I said negative things in public about George Bush,
Right.
I got lots of hate mail.
Okay.
Well, I don't respond the way.
Right.
Hate mail. First hate mail I got, I shot the guy back an email that blew his mind, telling him where he could go or whatever he wanted to do with it. And so the thing is that I don't mind giving it out because it's open. But that's the easiest way to reach me.
Well, let's just tell everybody we don't want any of that. We want you to be professional, positive, and if you have an appropriate, correct type of praise or a question, that's. But other than that, we don't want any type of craziness coming his way.
And if they do write me something crazy, I may come looking for them. They think they're gonna I may show up on their doorstep first.
Okay. Well, let's just. On thing I said, it was a wonderful time to interview you, and I hope that the public really got a chance to learn a lot. And definitely go and get those books. As I said, I'm getting the book that we'll talk about it. I have to get that book. And we really appreciate your time and sharing with us. And you have a wonderful day. You stick around for a quick second, and we're going to say bye to everybody else. I want you to subscribe, share, like, and comment, and really be educated and enriched by the information that he has shared with us today. And we definitely are the better for interviewing him and being educated. Until next time, we'll see another time on American Authors and Others. Okay.